Hi, welcome to High Road. My name's Andrew. In this video, I'm going to explain to you the differences between stereo and mono. I'm going to let you hear the differences for yourself, and then I'm going to show you how we use both techniques in modern recording. Could you hear the difference between the stereo and the mono version just then? If you could hear the difference, then great. If you couldn't, then it's possible that either you need some ear training or more likely you're listening on the wrong kind of system, like an iPhone speaker. If you want to get the most out of this video, then you really need to be listening to it through a set of stereo speakers like these, or through a set of stereo earphones or headphones. Alright, let's start by talking about what stereo is. Because humans have two ears, we're able to hear the world around us in stereo. That means we're able to hear what directions sounds are coming from, and we can perceive the three-dimensional space around us by the sound reflections bouncing off surfaces. This is all made possible by the brain, which is able to detect when a sound reaches one ear before the other, and from that calculate which direction the sound came from. Stereo recording is a technique which seeks to reproduce the three-dimensional listening experience we get with two ears. The simplest way to do this is to represent each ear with a separate microphone, one for left and one for right. These mics are then recorded onto separate tracks of a recording system. Those tracks are then panned left and right and played back through separate speakers or headphones, one for left and one for right. As long as the left and right signals are kept separate along that whole recording and playback path, then the listener will hear what the original two microphones heard. The listener will have a stereo listening experience. Sitting in front of me here is a stereo recorder with both left and right microphones. What that means is if I take two shakers, you can hear the one on the left coming from the left and the one on the right coming from the right. Pretty cool, hey? Wait till you hear this. That's stereo. Mono or monophonic sound is what you would experience if you only had one ear. With only one ear, the brain is unable to use timing differences to pinpoint the directionality of a sound. In this scenario, everything sounds like it's coming from the same direction. The simplest way to create a mono recording is to use one microphone, one recording track, and one playback speaker. In fact, that's how early jazz recordings were made. However, any recording, even one with multiple inputs and multiple tracks, will be mono if all the tracks are panned to the center. In this example, I'm using the same two microphones as before, but they're both panned to the center. What that means is that when I take the shakers and I shake the one on the left and the one on the right, they don't sound like they're coming from the left or the right anymore. They both sound like they're coming from the middle. No difference. Now let's hear it again in stereo. Mono. Stereo. Mono. Okay, I've explained what stereo is, I've explained what mono is, and you've heard the differences for yourself. Now I'm going to explain how we use both formats in modern recording. There's basically two main stages to the process: recording and then mixing. Let's talk about recording first. Imagine a typical pop song with vocals, guitars, keyboards, bass, and drums. You could record any of those instruments in either stereo or mono, but here's what you would typically do. Vocals, always mono. One mic recorded to one track. Acoustic guitar can be recorded either way. Usually mono if it's part of a big arrangement with lots of instruments and parts, but if it's a stripped back arrangement, then stereo recording can make the acoustic guitar sound wider and bigger. Electric guitar, usually mono, even if the amp has multiple microphones. Usually those are combined into one mono signal anyway. Keyboards can be captured either way. If it's just small synthesizer parts that come and go throughout the song, those can probably just be recorded in mono. But if it's a grand piano or a synth patch that's got some special stereo effects, then record it in stereo so you capture the full sound. Bass guitar, always in mono. You can either plug the bass guitar directly into a recording interface, or you can mic the bass cabinet. You can also record both signals at once and combine them into a mono signal. Drums are recorded with a mixture of mics, but the overall sound will be stereo. Normally you would use a pair of stereo overhead mics to capture the full sound of the kit, plus every individual drum would be mic'd with its own individual mic, which is going to an individual recording track. It's really common to use up to 8 tracks or more when recording a full drum kit. So once the recording stage is complete, it's onto the mixing stage. One of the goals of mixing is to find a place for every part somewhere in the stereo spectrum. Let's start with the drums. We're going to pan the overhead mics hard left and hard right for a nice wide sound. We'll keep the kick and snare panned to the center for power and drive. Tom 1 about 40% to the left and Tom 2 about 40% to the right. We'll pan the hi-hat mic about 70% to the left. Let's have a listen to what we've got now. This panning structure emulates the drummer's perspective from left to right, but if you want to flip it around the other way, that would emulate the audience perspective. The bass guitar will keep panned to the center because bass frequencies are very powerful, and if you pan them to the left or the right, it can make the mix sound lopsided. For acoustic guitar, it's common to double track the same part in mono and pan one to either side. This isn't true stereo, by the way. This is a stereo effect, and it works in a mix like this because it makes the acoustic guitar sound wide and present, but it isn't cluttering up the center of the mix. It's taking up the space on the edges. The electric guitar, I'm going to pan 50% to the left, and I'll balance that on the right with a stereo piano spread between 30% and 70%. This background synth part can go 85% to the left, and the shaker can go 85% to the right. Lastly, I'm going to put the main vocal dead center with the backing vocals panned either side 100% to the left and 100% to the right.
Feel I should stand when she walks in the room.
Let's listen to the final result and then compare it to the same thing in mono.
Feel I should stand when she walks in the room. The way she commands it, like she planned it, I presume. Feel I should stand when she walks in the room. The way she commands it, like she planned it, I presume.
It's a big difference, isn't it? To me, the stereo version sounds so much more three-dimensional. Now, even though the final result is a stereo recording, keep in mind that most of the parts were actually recorded in mono and then panned or enhanced with reverb to create an artificial stereo mix. The bass, kick, snare, and vocals are all essentially still represented in mono because those parts need to be front and center, with everything else panned somewhere else in the stereo spectrum so that everything has its own space. However, I think the drum overheads actually contribute a lot to the realism of the stereo effect because the drum overheads were actually recorded in true stereo. Okay, at this point you may have some questions, so before we go any further, let's address a few things that commonly cause confusion between stereo and mono. The first thing you might be wondering is, what do I mean by panning to the center? Because there's a left speaker and there's a right speaker, but obviously there's no speaker in the center. Well, that's because in stereo recording, the center channel doesn't actually exist. When you pan something to the center on your mixer or in your recording software, it's actually sending the signal equally to both speakers, and that creates the illusion for the listener that there's a speaker in the middle. Following on from that, you might be wondering, if you listen to a mono recording, say a jazz recording from the 1950s, through two speakers, does that make it stereo? No, it's still mono because both speakers are producing the same signal. You're just hearing mono through two speakers at the same time, and as mentioned, the sound would appear as if it's coming from the middle. You may be wondering, is there any way to take a mono recording, say a jazz recording from the 1950s, and convert it into stereo? Also no. That would be like trying to take green paint and convert it back into yellow and blue. It can't be done. Next thing you might be wondering is, if you only listen to one side of a stereo recording, say just the left or just the right, is that mono? Well, kind of. Technically what you're hearing would be a mono sound, but it's not really mono, it's actually just half of the stereo signal. For it to be truly mono, you would need to blend both the left and right signals together into one combined mono signal. One example of this is if you want to share one of your earphones with a friend so you can both listen to the same song, you can actually switch your iPhone to mono playback mode so that neither of you are missing out on any of the signal. Following on from that, you might be wondering, do you have to pan all the signals to the center for it to be mono? Could you pan everything to the left or everything to the right? Would that be mono? Well, technically yes, that would be mono. As long as all the signals are panned to one place, it's mono. But I can't think of a good reason to pan everything to one side or the other. If you're going to make a mono recording, just pan everything to the center so that it translates across all possible playback formats. Now there's one more thing I want to mention, and this is pretty important. It's mono compatibility. Every stereo recording needs to be mono compatible because there are so many playback formats that are in mono. iPhone speakers, Bluetooth speakers, lots of laptop speakers, television speakers, PA systems in venues and clubs, AM radio, and also the background music systems in shopping centres. If you want your stereo recording to translate well over one of those mono playback formats, then you have to check it for mono compatibility. This is as simple as converting your final stereo mix into mono using whatever audio software you have available. Also, a lot of audio interfaces have a mono button right there on the front panel, just for this reason. When you listen to the mono version, check that everything still sounds right. Remember, in stereo, the center channel is an illusion, so anything that was panned to the center, like vocals or bass, can sometimes come out sounding louder or softer when it's converted to mono. If that happens, make some adjustments to your stereo mix, then check it again in mono until you get it right. Generally speaking, the balance of the mono mix is closer to the truth. Well, I hope this video has been helpful in clarifying some of the differences between stereo and mono recording. As always, if you want to learn how to make music, record music, and build musical stuff, start now by subscribing below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.